Greetings and salutations, loyal viewers of this channel. My name is Sean, and today we got to talk about Kamala Harris going on Fox News, being interviewed by Bret Baier, and rage quitting the interview, completely falling apart in each and every question because it was absolutely magical in every possible way. But before we get into that, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
Give me the money. Give me the money. Okay.
And remind you that on Wednesday, October 23rd, I will be live in person in Lower Manhattan debating Joshua Eagle on the idea that libertarians should vote for Kamala Harris over any other candidate in this election. It's going to be an absolutely wonderful event. It's free to attend. Just click the registration link in the top of this description, and please, I hope to see you there if you can make it. So right off the top, I want to point out a couple of things. First and foremost, for some reason, the evil orange man, Donald Trump, was very upset that Fox News was providing Kamala Harris a platform, but in reality, having her do at least one contested interview prior to the election is a good thing, and she completely fell apart in this regard. So, evil orange man, you were definitely wrong in this particular case. Secondly, I will also point out that the reason why Kamala Harris wants to do a Fox News interview is because it turns out that of all the cable news agencies, the one viewed most by independents happens to be Fox News. The Democratic talking points, Democrat Party state media at MSNBC and CNN is not pulling in anybody but people who are already voting for Kamala. So all of these interviews that she has done over there haven't really moved the needle for her. So both people want to do this interview, and it's good that both people are doing this interview, especially since Kamala completely fell apart.
How many illegal immigrants would you estimate your administration has released into the country over the last 3.5 years?
Well, I'm glad you raised the issue of immigration because I agree with you. It is a topic of discussion that people want to rightly have. And you know what I'm going to talk about.
Yeah, but
right
do you
now,
just a number? Do you think it's 1 million, 3 million?
Brett, let's just get to the point. Okay, the point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired.
So your Homeland Security Secretary said that 85% of apprehensions.
I'm not finished. We have an
it's a rough estimate of 6 million people have been released into the country. And let me just finish. I'll get to the question. I promise you.
I was beginning to answer.
And so already, and I mean already, Kamala Harris is completely done with this question. It was as follows. How many illegals has your administration paroled into this nation? Is it 1 million, 2 million, 6 million? Can you put a number on what you've done? And Kamala Harris is immediately trying to pivot to a talking point we've heard a million times, which is the evil orange man, because he's evil and orange, decided to kill a bipartisan border bill because he's such an evil bad orange man. Now, of course, this bill was brought up 3.5 years into the presidency and vice presidency of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden. And the fact of the matter is, prior to that, they pretended like the border wasn't a problem. They pretended that the border was secure, and they said there was no issue at all whatsoever. And in reality, the reason why they did that is because it was their planned policies from the campaigns to say that we're going to let in all these people as long as they say that they're claiming asylum. We have the clip of Joe Biden saying, let them surge to the border.
I would, in fact, make sure that we immediately surge to the border. All those people are seeking asylum. They deserve to be heard. That's who we are. We're a nation that says if you want to flee and you're fleeing oppression, you should come.
That is exactly what he did when he came into office. And we have Kamala Harris saying that we should decriminalize border crossings.
Let me just be very clear. We have to have a secure border, but I am in favor of saying that we're not going to treat people who are undocumented across the border as criminals. That's correct. That is correct.
And guess what? Both of those policies were implemented as they came into office. These illegals were paroled into this country. We all understand that, and that's exactly what they ran on. That's exactly what they did. So it's 100% their fault.
When you came into office, your administration immediately reversed a number of Trump border policies. Most significantly, the policy that required illegal immigrants to be detained through deportation, either in the U.S. or in Mexico. And you switched that policy. They were released from custody awaiting trial. So instead, included in those were a large number of single men, adult men, who went on to commit heinous crimes. So, looking back, do you regret the decision to terminate Remain in Mexico at the beginning of your administration.
So right here, Bret Baier asks one of the most crucial questions that can be asked related to immigration policy, and this is the removal of one of the most intelligent immigration policies that the Trump administration has put in. And by the way, I'm not exaggerating by this, but one of the most intelligent immigration policies put in by an administration in decades in this country, which is, of course, remain in Mexico. Because again, let me run this down for you guys really quickly. You have a bunch of different people that are coming in from various countries and crossing the US-Mexico border. When they get here, they claim asylum in this nation. And Remain in Mexico said, listen, you can claim asylum here. Obviously, that is allowed, but you have to claim asylum, which is not economic migration. It is for fear of safety in each and every country along your journey to the United States of America. And this just makes perfect sense. It is the best way to cut down on asylum fraud. And this, of course, was removed by Joe Biden, by Kamala Harris, because they determined it to be evil white racism. So all of these different people were able to come and defraud our asylum system, clog it up, and it's been an unmitigated disaster.
At the beginning of our administration, within practically hours of taking the oath, the first bill that we offered Congress, before we worked on infrastructure, before the Inflation Reduction Act, before the CHIPS and Science Act, before the bipartisan Safer Communities Act, the first bill, practically within hours of taking the oath, was a bill to fix our immigration system.
Yes, ma'am. It was called the U.S. Citizenship Act of 2021.
Exactly.
It was essentially a pathway to citizenship for the...
Yes, ma'am. May I finish responding, please?
But
you have to let me finish,
You
please.
had the White House and the House and the Senate,
I'm
and they didn't bring up that bill.
I'm in the middle of responding to the point you're raising,
okay,
and I'd like to finish.
Yes, ma'am.
We recognized from day one that, to the point of this being your first question, it is a priority for us as a nation and for the American people. And our focus has been on fixing a problem. And from day one, then, we have done a number of things, including to address our asylum system and put more resources, getting more judges, what we needed to do to tighten up penalties and increase penalties for illegal crossings, what we needed to do to deal with points of entry between border entry points. That's the work we did, and we worked on supporting what was a bipartisan effort, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Congress.
So look, I will link the full interview in the description of this video so you guys can check it out for yourself. But as you can see, the strategy for Kamala Harris is to regurgitate her talking points over and over again, filibuster throughout the course of time of the interview in order to avoid answering difficult questions. And by the way, this is her strategy throughout all of her interviews. The difference is that this is the first interview that she's done where anybody wants to press her on any single issue. Every other interview that she's done has been an ass-kissing ceremony, but this time, Bret Baier of Fox News is just not having it. So he's trying to cut her off. He's trying to get her to shut up and actually answer the question, and Kamala Harris has nothing but her stupid-ass talking points, and this is laid bare for everybody out there in the audience to actually see. Now, Bret Baier pushes back even further on her. He points out that that immigration bill that they offered to Congress when they first came into office is nonsensical.
Democrats voted against that bill. It would have allowed 1.8 million illegal immigrants into the country a year. A lot of conservatives had a problem with it.
And she points out that this bipartisan bill that she talks about, that supposedly the evil orange man killed, was voted down in part by 6 Democratic senators.
These are the 6 Democrats. But more importantly, back to the original premise, Jocelyn Nungary, Rachel Morin, Laken Riley, they are young women who were brutally assaulted and killed by some of the men who were released at the beginning of the administration, well before a negotiated bipartisan bill.
So finally, we actually see a Democrat confronted in an interview, early on in an interview, with the people that are killed by illegal immigrants paroled into this country by the Biden-Harris administration. And obviously, Kamala Harris doesn't want to talk about it. She's like, oh, it's so sad or whatever. But here's the thing. This bipartisan bill, this magical bill that wasn't supported by even all the Democrats, Trump killed it because he's an evil orange man. And honestly, we could have had 9 months of protection. But Bret Baier points out yet again that these are people that were let in very early on into the Biden-Harris administration when Kamala Harris was named the border czar.
This is well before any negotiation. This is well before Donald Trump got involved in the politics. This is a specific policy decision by your administration to release these men into the country. So what I'm saying to you, do you owe
Bret,
those families an apology?
Let me just say, first of all, those are tragic cases. There's no question about that. There's no question about that. And I can't imagine the pain that the families of those victims have experienced for a loss that should not have occurred. So that is true. It is also true that if a border security had actually been passed 9 months ago, it would be 9 months that we would have had more border agents at the border, more support for the folks who are working around the clock trying to hold it all together.
Madam Vice President.
To ensure that no future harm would occur. And this election in 20 days will determine whether we have a president of the United States who actually cares more about fixing a problem, even if it is not to their political advantage in an election. Because there was a solution, Bret.
Madam Vice President, it was a policy decision in the early part of your administration.
So their deaths are based on policy that, of course, the Biden-Harris administration ended up backing up full force.
I will let one of the mothers talk about it. Take a listen.
Because of the Biden-Harris administration open border policies catch and release, they were enrolled in the Alternatives to Detention program. This meant that they were released into the United States. It was not even a full 3 weeks later that they would take my daughter, Jocelyn Nungare's life. I believe the Biden-Harris administration open border policies are responsible for the death of my daughter.
That's the early days. So do you owe them an apology is what I'm saying.
I will tell you that I am so sorry for her loss. I'm so sorry for her loss. Sincerely. But let's talk about what is happening right now with an individual who does not want to participate in solutions.
So right there we see a clip of a family member of Jocelyn who was killed by somebody 3 weeks after they were paroled into this country by the Kamala Harris and Joseph R. Biden administration, by the border czar. And you could see by Kamala's body language, by her facial expression, that she just got hit by a train metaphorically, which is Bret Baier bringing the facts, bringing them up to her face. And obviously she has no retort for this. And by the way, I see a lot of people on the left try to dismiss this and say, oh, well, people get murdered all the time in the United States of America. And yes, that is true. We have a lot of citizens in the United States of America who commit murders. But the thing is, they're citizens. And if there is policy, by the way, that ended up leading to them committing a murder, like bail reform or something like that, where we had a chance to get them off the street and we didn't, I talk about those specific cases. That being said, again, those people are already baked into the cake of the United States of America. These are people, these murderers, that should have been kept out of the country, should have been detained by our federal government, that the Harris-Biden administration let into the country, paroled into the country. So these are preventable murders from non-citizens based on policies that these people advocate for. And again, I will point out, they didn't give a damn. They said it was no crisis at all whatsoever up until it became politically inconvenient for them 3.5 years into the Biden presidency. So they will allow this to happen again. If they get elected, she's not going to push for border security. What she's going to do is double down on these policies because that will prove that they can ignore the border for 3.5 years, pretend they care about it in the last 6 months right before the election, and then all of a sudden, once they win, they can drop the issue once again and let millions upon millions of more people flood into our nation.
Let's talk about that as well.
But do you want to answer
in all fairness, I told you, I feel awful for what she and her family have experienced.
During that time, you said repeatedly that the border was secure. When in your mind did it start becoming a crisis?
So Bret Baier asked one of the more crucial questions, which is she had been saying that the border is secure, everything's perfectly fine. So when did it switch? When did it all of a sudden become a crisis? Because you in the Democratic Party, and you specifically, Kamala Harris, were denying that it was a crisis.
I think we've had a broken immigration system transcending, by the way, Donald Trump's administration even before. Let's all be honest about that. I have no pride in saying that this is a perfect immigration system. I've been clear, I think we all are, that it needs to be fixed. We need more. I was just down at the border talking with border agents, and they will tell you, and I'm sure you probably, I know you investigate and you are a serious journalist, They will tell you, we need more judges.
So you could just hear it in her voice. You can hear it breaking, you can hear it cracking, you can hear the nerves, the low talking, and all of that. You also can see the expression on her face that this was a horrible mistake doing this Fox News interview, because for whatever reason, she thought she was going to get the kid gloves treatment, or that she was going to be able to handle this, despite the fact that all of the evidence would show us the exact opposite. I mean, there's a reason why Kamala Harris refused to do an interview for 6 weeks after stealing the Democratic nomination from Joe Biden. And when she started doing interviews, they were all friendly interviews that she bombed, by the way, that she performed terribly in, by the way. And now that she's got her first combative interview 20 some odd days before the election, she completely crumbles under pressure. She completely embarrasses herself, and she can't handle basic questions that she should have been ready for about the border, about her policies, and about the fact that she's flip-flopped on all of her positions.
But you frequently talked to the Border Patrol Union for support of that bipartisan bill, and they did. They supported it. But they also just endorsed Donald Trump and said, you've been, quote, a failure with border security. Why do you think they said that?
I think they're frustrated, and I get it. They want support. They want support, and that's what that border security bill would have done. These guys down at the border, these men and women, they're working hard. They're working around the clock. I get it.
So Bret ends up trying to wrap up the immigration topic by saying that you've talked about the Border Patrol Union supporting this particular bill. Obviously, they're going to support a bill, by the way, that ends up leading to the hiring of 1,500 new union members. So there's no surprise that they ended up supporting that. But then he brings up the fact that this very same union actually is endorsing the evil orange man, Donald Trump. And Kamala Harris, again, listen to the tone of voice, listen to the inflection. Look at her nodding her head no when she says that, oh, I get it. She is totally in a panic right here. Normally, the way these interviews go is that Kamala Harris gets asked a question and she says, I grew up middle class. I'm not like the evil orange man who had money. I grew up middle class. And, you know, my parents, when I was in high school, my mama, she ended up buying a home. And, you know, it's very important to buy a home. So here's why I'm going to introduce this policy that will actually increase the price of housing. That's normally how these interviews go, but Bret Baier is obviously not having it.
There's a lot of people that look back at what you said in 2019 when you first ran for president. And there have been changes, and you've talked about some of them. When it comes to immigration, you supported allowing immigrants in the country illegally to apply for driver's license, to qualify for free tuition at universities, to be enrolled in free health care. Do you still support those things?
Listen, that was 5 years ago, and I'm very clear that I will follow the law. I have made that statement over and over again, and as Vice President of the United States, that's exactly what I've done, not to mention before.
So again, the questions from Bret Baier and the non-answers tell the whole story right here. So Bret Baier asked her about the fact that when she was running for president in 2019, which by the way is the same area where she advocated for decriminalizing border crossings, which she gets asked about later on, and then she says, oh, I'm not in favor of that, I'm not in favor of that, I'm not in favor of that, even though that's exactly what they did, essentially, when she was put in charge of the border. But this particular question about the driver's license is obviously a setup, because Tim Walz ended up endorsing and signing into law all of these various policies, and Kamala Harris is not prepared for this.
If that's the case, you chose a running mate, Tim Walz, governor of Minnesota, who signed those very things into state law. So do you support that?
We are very clear, and I am very clear, as is Tim Walz, that we must support and enforce federal law. And that is exactly what we will do.
This is the amazing thing about being a Democratic candidate, is that basic questions about this, basic standards of vetting your VP, they do not apply to them in normal circumstances. So when they do, she ends up completely falling apart. And then she says, oh, I'm going to follow the law. I'm going to follow the law. But we all know that the president can use prosecutorial discretion when it comes to certain laws. And this is exactly what the Biden administration did. And by the way, what the Trump administration did when they decided to go harder on immigration laws versus the softer approach of Kamala Harris and Joe Biden.
Kamala supports taxpayer-funded sex changes for prisoners.
Surgery.
For prisoners.
For prisoners. Every transgender inmate in the prison system would have access.
So are you still in support of using taxpayer dollars to help prison inmates or detained illegal aliens to transition to another gender?
I will follow the law, and it's a law that Donald Trump actually followed. You're probably familiar with, now it's a public report, that under Donald Trump's administration, these surgeries were available on a medical necessity basis to people in the federal prison system. And I think, frankly, that ad from the Trump campaign is a little bit of like throwing stones when you're living in a glass house.
The Trump aides say that he never advocated for that prison policy and no gender transition surgeries
you got to take responsible for what happened in your administration.
So I love this. They end up bringing up the evil orange man's ad about how Kamala Harris is for they, them, and Trump is for you. And that's a reference to the fact that Kamala Harris wants the taxpayer to fund gender transition surgeries for detained illegal migrants because that's something that she thought was a good thing. And she said it, by the way, she repeated it, she signed on to it over and over again in 2019. So her defense is, oh, the evil orange man actually allowed this. Evil orange man did this, even though there are no instances of this occurring at all whatsoever. And then, of course, she ends up saying, oh, I'll follow the law just like him. But the funny thing about this is that this is something that Kamala Harris advocated for. This is something that she gave her full support towards, but she won't answer whether or not she's in favor of it now. All she'll do is bitch and moan about the fact that Trump is playing these ads across the airwaves.
Would you still advocate for using taxpayer dollars for gender reassignment surgeries?
I will follow the law, just as I think Donald Trump would say he did.
You would have a say as president.
Like I said, I think he spent $20 million on those ads, trying to create a sense of fear in the voters because he actually has no plan in this election that is about focusing on the needs of the American people. Whereas, at $20 million on that ad, on an issue that, as it relates to the biggest issues that affect the American people, it's really quite remote. And again, his policy was no different. Look at where we are, though.
And how she's really upset about that, when the fact of the matter is that if this was an ineffective ad that didn't move the needle, she would just be dismissing it. And by the way, actually tell us what she thinks about the policies that she advocated for back in 2019.
Would you have done something differently than President Biden during the past 4 years?
There is not a thing that comes to mind in terms of, and I've been a part of most of the decisions that have had impact.
Under a Harris administration, what would the major changes be and what would stay the same?
Sure. Well, I mean, I'm obviously not Joe Biden.
I know.
And so that would be one change in terms of, but also I think it's important to say with, 28 days to go, I'm not Donald Trump.
So you're not Joe Biden, you're not Donald Trump, but nothing comes to mind that you would do differently?
Let me be very clear. My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency. And like every new president that comes into office, I will bring my life experiences, my professional experiences, and fresh and new ideas. I represent a new generation of leadership.
So right there, Bret Baier asked her the crucial question that she's been asked time and time again, and he plays her answer, by the way, where she says that she couldn't think of anything that she would have done different from Joe Biden, and she ends up finally saying, listen, I'm not going to be a continuation of the Biden presidency. This is the separation from Joe Biden that we talked about on this channel before that is likely going to lead to backlash from the Biden camp, which again, I absolutely am here for. I want Kamala Harris to be at war with Joe Biden and his team based on the fact that she wants to throw him under the bus, when in reality, in actuality, the only reason that Kamala Harris is the Democratic presidential candidate is because Joe Biden stepped down and she was the only one who could receive the $30 million in his war chest to actually run for president. So yeah, she's going to throw him under the bus. She's going to backstab him because that's exactly who she is. That's who she's always been. Absolute scum through and through. And we're seeing that on display right now. And I can't wait for the Biden team to respond to undercut her even further, because honestly, she deserves this. She stole the nomination that she could not have won if she would have actually been honest about Joe Biden's dementia and all his issues and got him to step aside earlier in terms of being the candidate. She would have got demolished in the primary. And the fact is, the person that she is somebody who will sacrifice country for her own power, and that makes her incredibly dangerous.
Your campaign slogan is a new way forward, and it's time to turn the page. You've been vice president for 3.5 years. So what are you turning the page from?
Well, first of all, turning the page from the last decade in which we've been burdened with the kind of rhetoric coming from Donald Trump that has been designed and implemented to divide our country and have Americans literally point fingers at each other. rhetoric and an approach to leadership that suggests that the strength of a leader is based on who you beat down instead of what we all know. The strength of leadership is based on who you lift up.
But Bret Baier asked one of the most crucial questions, which is, you keep running on turning the page and a new way forward and all of that, but you're already in office. You've been the vice president for 3.5 years, and we get the same standard stupid answer about how, oh, we have the thing with Trump and his rhetoric and all that. But my favorite part is when she says unburdened, and that makes me laugh because it makes me think of that stupid ass quote she keeps repeating.
Well, first of all, turning the page from the last decade in which we've been burdened. I can imagine what can be and be unburdened by what has been. You know? What can be unburdened by what has been. 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 What we can see, what we believe can be unburdened by what has been. What 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 can be unburdened by what has been. Who we can be, unburdened by who we have been. What can be unburdened by what has been. Where we can be, unburdened by where we have been, and unburdened by where we are right now. What can be unburdened by what has been. What can be unburdened by what has been. What can be unburdened by what has been.
But fundamentally, this question is devastating for Kamala Harris because she wants to run as an agent of change, pretend like she's this newcomer, this outsider, when again, she's been vice president and she's in favor of all these different various policies that make her different from Joe Biden. Why isn't she advocating for them as vice president? Why all of a sudden, now that she's gotten the nomination, does she want to do all of this different various stuff when in reality, she could have been in a position to push for this while she was the VP?
Brett,
more than 70% of people tell the country is on the wrong track. They say the country is on the wrong track. If it's on the wrong track, that track follows 3.5 years of you being vice president and President Biden being president. That is what they're saying, 79% of them. Why are they saying that? If you're turning the page, you've been in office for 3.5 years.
And Donald Trump has been running for office.
But you've been the person holding the office.
Come on.
Madam
You
Vice
and I
President.
both know what I'm talking about. You and I both know what I'm talking about.
I actually don't. What are you talking about?
What I'm talking about is that over the last decade, people have become. But listen, over the last decade, it is clear to me.
So my favorite part about this is the fact that she tried to appeal to Bret, saying, you know what I mean, Bret. You understand where I'm coming from. And Bret's like, no, I have no idea what the hell you're talking about. Nobody does. Right there, Bret Baier became the avatar for the American people, and I'm absolutely here for it.
The American people, he's the one who talks about an enemy within, an enemy within, talking about the American people, suggesting he would turn the American military on the American people.
We asked that question to the former president today. Harris Faulkner had a town hall, and this is how he responded.
I heard about that. They were saying I was like threatening. I'm not threatening anybody. They're the ones doing the threatening. They do phony investigations. I've been investigated more than Alphonse Capone. He was the greatest gangster. No, it's true. No, but think of it. It's called weaponization of government. It's a terrible thing.
So,
Brett, I'm sorry, and with all due respect, that clip was not what he has been saying about the enemy within that he has repeated when he's speaking about the American people. That's not what you just showed.
So Kamala Harris gets mad that this clip of Trump supposedly saying that he's going to commit violence against the American people was not shown. But the fact of the matter is that clip in particular that she's talking about was Trump saying that in response to him winning, he's expecting there to be rioting like the Antifa rioting that happened after he won in 2016.
Let's remember, you've got 50,000 Chinese nationals in this country in the last couple of years. Yeah. You have people on the terrorist watch list, 350 in the last couple of years. You got, like you said, 13,000 murderers and 15,000 rapists. Right. What are you expecting? Joe Biden said he doesn't think it's going to be a peaceful election day.
Well, he doesn't have any idea what's happening in all fairness. He spends most of his day sleeping. I think the bigger problem is the enemy from within, not even the people that have come in and destroying our country. By the way, totally destroying our country. The towns, the villages, they're being inundated. But I don't think they're the problem in terms of election day. I think the bigger problem are the people from within. We have some very bad people. We have some sick people, radical left lunatics. And I think they're the big, and it should be very easily handled by, if necessary, by National Guard, or if really necessary, by the military. because they can't let that happen.
One of the things that people tend to forget is that the Black Lives Matter riots post George Floyd, that dramatic left-wing violence, that was just a continuation of what was going on during Trump's presidency from the left. If you'll remember, they actually destroyed a limousine because they thought it represented rich people during his inauguration. It ended up belonging to a Middle Eastern immigrant, but there were riots and graffiti and violence from the left consistently outside of Trump's rallies while he was campaigning, after he was elected and he was president-elect, and even on Inauguration Day and beyond that point. So Trump was talking about how they should use the National Guard to clamp down on the rioting from the left wing that, by the way, was encouraged by people like Kamala Harris bailing out the Black Lives Matter rioters through the Minnesota Bail Fund.
You call Donald Trump he's misguided. You say now
he's unstable. He is unstable, Brett.
He's not well. You say he's mentally not stable.
He's not stable.
Let me ask you this. You told many interviewers that Joe Biden was on his game, that ran around circles on his staff. When did you first notice that President Biden's mental faculties appeared diminished?
Joe Biden, I have watched from the Oval Office to the Situation Room, and he has the judgment and the experience to do exactly what he has done in making very important decisions on behalf of the American people.
So now this is another great question from Bret Baier, because one of the things that Kamala Harris is trying to do is flip the script and say that Trump is actually cognitively declining. He's so bad for president and he has these mental deficiencies and all that, when the fact of the matter is Kamala Harris covered this up for Joe Biden for years, pretended it away, talked about how he was super sharp behind the scenes. And the reason why she did that is because she knew, in part, if Biden stepped down when they could have run a primary, she would have lost the primary. So she covered up Biden's decline while he was president of the United States, but now she's going to turn around and attack the evil orange man and say that he's in decline, when the fact of the matter is, Trump is pretty much exactly how Trump has been. Sure, he does his weirdo things from time to time, but this is who he was prior to being in office, and sure, with age, he's probably slowed a little bit, but the fact of the matter is, it is not comparable with what Joe Biden had been going through throughout his presidency that Kamala Harris had covered up. So she's trying to deny, deflect, and all that, and it's absolutely embarrassing in every possible way, especially the examples that these people tend to use.
There were no concerns raised?
Brett, Joe Biden is not on ballot.
I understand.
And Donald Trump
but you talked about it.
And Donald Trump
After George Clooney said within a few minutes of talking to President Biden at a fundraiser that he thought this was not the same Joe Biden that we saw on the debate stage.
Donald Trump is on the ballot.
I understand. You met with him at least once a week for 3.5 years. You didn't have any concerns?
I think the American people have a concern about Donald Trump.
So one of the examples that Kamala Harris doesn't bring up in this debate, but it was actually brought up on the Kamala HQ Twitter account, was the idea that Trump was just listening to music for 40-something minutes during one of his town halls. When the fact of the matter is, what actually ended up happening was there was a medical emergency in the crowd, and Trump, rather than continuing his town hall like an uncaring absolute animal, decided to pause the rally, and they listened to music as this person's medical needs were taken care of. Anybody could have looked this up for themselves, but the Kamala Harris campaign had to lie about it, and the reason why is because that's exactly what they do when it comes to the issue of cognitive decline. They lied for years about Biden. Bret Baier is pointing this out, and now they're lying about the evil orange man.
Madam Vice President, they're wrapping me very hard here. I hope you got to say what you wanted to say about Donald Trump. There are a lot of things.
There's more to say. I have much more to say.
There are a lot of things that people want to learn about you and your policies, and that's why
I invite everyone to go to KamalaHarris.com, and you will see that I have 80 pages of policies that are quite comprehensive and should be accessible to anyone who would like to read them. And it includes what I intend to do about affordable housing, what I intend to do about small businesses, what I do
and that's why we invited you here to see where you were in 2019 and where you are now.
America's military and ensure we have the most lethal and best fighting force in the world.
Madam Vice President, they're giving me a hard rap.
Now, what's absolutely hilarious about this is that Kamala's team ends up pulling her out. They end up coming in. They start waving to shut down the interview because obviously this is going disastrously, and they don't want to give Bret Baier any more highlights, any more time to embarrass Kamala because her own staff knows that she's an absolute disaster. And you can actually hear her saying, "Oh, I can stay," to the people that are behind the camera, trying to make it seem like she's talking to Bret Bret Baier, but Bret Baier made this absolutely clear later on during his show. He also pointed out that Kamala Harris ended up showing up late. They ended up reducing the time that they were going to allot to him last minute, and all these different various techniques to throw Bret Baier off of his game. But guess what? Kamala Harris, on her game, can't handle anything. She can't deal with questions. And I also want to point out that for a campaign that was run on joy and vibes, all of a sudden you really see the anger and the fury and the nastiness as soon as she gets pressed. This is the Kamala Harris that we hear about behind the scenes, the nasty, vindictive person who can't wait to cut somebody down before they build them up. And this is exactly what we expected, and it was embarrassing. In fact, it was more embarrassing than a lot of us expected. Some people thought that Bret Baier was going to go soft on her because Fox News wanted to start interviewing top-line Democrats going forward, but the fact is, Bret Baier pressed her. He didn't waste this opportunity. He didn't waste a single question, and Kamala Harris had no response, no retort. You know why? Because she can't handle scrutiny. That's why she hid for so long as vice president. That's why she hid after getting the nomination for 6 weeks. That's why she continued to hide by only doing friendly interviews. And the first time she steps out of her bubble, the first time she steps in to interview with somebody that disagrees with her, she melts down, rages out, and her staff has to pull her out because she's just that weak. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts. I want to know what you guys think about this down in the comments below. If you like the video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social media, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about Kamala Harris getting demolished by Bret Baier. Till next time.